what I really, really like in these classes, and I hope that most of you do too, is the chance for you to share your experience with me. Now, some students are more comfortable with having the instructor tell them everything about the subject. And that's okay too, but I really do like the sort of exchange, I'll give you some prompts, and if you remember something and it makes you think about something, then feel free to share it. And I will try also to impart some information to you along the way. But to me, that's sort of like the beauty of doing a subject like this, because we've all been through it. We've all lived in California. We went through this music, and I think that the memories that it can stir from time to time are really, really therapeutic in a way, beneficial. So I just wanted to say that to start off with. Today we're going to move inland just a bit to start with. We're going to examine some of the cowboy music that came out of California in the early days. And of course, don't expect authenticity in this cowboy music. Because one of the things about the whole California sound and so forth is that so much of it is predicated upon Hollywood. And I think it's so interesting that the California, we were talking last week about how everything from the gold rush to the orange crate art to the kind of Chamber of Commerce message that was sent out about California in the early days made it sort of a dreamland. It was a place of, you could go there and realize dreams. And of course, most of us that have been here know it's a wonderful place, but it comes up so much short of being nirvana, as they say. And so we're going to be looking at that aspect of it, the fact that through Hollywood, which was, and it's obvious if you stop and think about it, why Hollywood became the center of the motion picture industry. It actually outcompeted La Mesa for that honor. Actually, in the early days, La Mesa was being considered as a place to establish studios. But just a couple words about that. You can see why, because you've got the weather, which allows you to shoot outdoors a lot of the year. You've got the variety of landscape, everything from ocean settings to mountain settings to desert settings. So whatever story you're trying to portray, you've probably got a good backdrop for it. And I think it's also very interesting if you look back on the silent movies, the 1920s and the teens, and you see Los Angeles back in those days with all the little houses and the bare streets with no trees growing up on them yet, It's kind of interesting. So that's kind of what we're going to deal with today, and we're going to work our way up to the epic story of the Beach Boys. But first we have to sort of set the table for it. And I'm going to start off, I'm going to do you one of my own songs here that is a song that has to do with sort of California in its natural state. Not only California, but just the Southwest. Because I'm a Southwest guy. I was born in Tucson, raised in Tucson, in Phoenix and San Diego. So this is a song kind of about the desert and the high desert. It's a song, it's called Things I've Always Known. The sound of the high wind, clear light in the thin air, the dry scent of pinon and juniper. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Always known that ant and black beetle, lizard the color of sand, the high sounding hawk, the dry throat throated raven. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Always known. Mirage on the highway and sounds on the radio. Thunder and lightning, flash floods the arroyo. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Always known. We worship the sun, desire the rain. We're moved by the wind, again and again. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Things I've always known. Always known.
Nice.
Well, thanks. So that kind of, I mean, California is, that's the great thing about it. We have so many landscapes to work on. And landscapes affect music. They affect the way that we think about our world. You know, you look out and the ocean has a certain vibration to it. And so music comes out of, we listened to Dick Dale and the whole surf thing last week. That kind of comes out of that sort of sound. But California had a real, of course, as opposed to the fantasy history, as a as ranch land. You know, I mean, there was a lot of real cowboys that were out here in the early days. And there are some songs if you want to dig into it. I'm not going to. We're going to get into the fantasy world of cowboy songs, which came from cowboy movies. And that's probably one of the big differences between the way kids have grown up in the last 20 years and the way a lot of us grew up. I mean, cowboy hats, holsters, it was like, that was what you played, you know, when you went out and outside. It was either that or World War II. So we're going to start off with a story about some characters that came out to California. Right, all these three people I'm going to talk about came out right before the sort of Dust Bowl refugee wave. Because they were very, we mentioned last week, we listened to the Woody Guthrie song, they were very disparaged. And they became the lowest of the low at that point in time. If you were called an Okie, that was not a good thing to be called. But there was a whole wave of immigration to California that started in the 1920s that these weren't wealthy people. Like, you know, you had your first wave of California immigrants in the late 19th century were mostly very well-to-do people who came out here for health reasons, because they could afford to, and so forth. And then you had, by the 1920s and 30s, these were people mostly from the Midwest. They were immigrating out here for various reasons. And a lot of it you have to think about sort of the way social evolution goes. It's like if you're living comfortably in a small town in Kansas, say for instance, or Indiana, Ohio, and you're somehow motivated to pick up and move to California, well, there's a certain kind of mindset that goes with that. And so when we look at our California culture, I think it's good to think about the kind of people who
got up and came out here. And the kind of rugged individual types, entrepreneurial types, people that came out here pursuing a dream, dreamers. I mean, you get all these sort of personalities that are drawn to California in the 1920s and the 1930s. And we're going to be talking about the Beach Boys and the Wilson family. Now, most of you probably know that the Beach Boys consisted mostly of the three brothers, Brian, Carl, and Dennis Wilson, and their cousin, Mike Love. They all came a generation previous from a place called Hutchinson, Kansas, out to the West Coast. So, like, the story begins, actually, I mean, this is like so many California stories. It begins a little bit earlier in the 1880s when I think it was the Beach Boys' great-grandfather came out to Escondido, of all places, and tried to get a vineyard started there. It wasn't successful. He was out here for a few years, but came back, but had this vision of California that he imparted to his kids. And so a generation later, 1920 or so, 1921, they came out to California. And I think this is kind of an interesting story in that the Wilsons, Brian, Dennis, and Carl's grandparents came out from Hutchinson, Kansas. They saw an ad put out by the Santa Fe Railway at the time. I think this is kind of interesting because it sort of gives you an idea of the sort of mythic nature of California. This is on a poster that said, "Ever see Los Angeles, Pasadena, Long Beach, Santa Monica, Catalina, or San Diego, or a Hollywood movie studio? Ever hear the concerts in the new Hollywood Bowl, or the Mission Bells at sunset?" That was compelling stuff. And so they came out to California, the Wilsons, in 1921. And the father, Brian Wilson's grandfather, had come out previously, and he had a job in Huntington Beach. We'll talk about Huntington Beach some more, because that's sort of a pivotal place too. But when the Wilson family came to California, they came to Cardiff, up in our North County, and there was nothing there at the time, and they lived in a tent on the beach, which would be, I think it sounds wonderful, but the mother of the family was sort of disappointed by that. So anyway, so you see that this whole sort of California story evolving. Then we have a guy from Cincinnati, Ohio, a guy named Leonard Sly. And he's born in 1911. I think I have his dates up there. And he comes out to Los Angeles as a 20-year-old in 1931. And he's driving trucks, and he's working in the migrant worker communities, picking fruit. And in these little community settings, he also had a guitar. And he would go from campfire to campfire, and he would entertain the workers. And he figured out he had a flair for this, a fellow named Leonard Sly. And he winds up, he goes on a radio show in LA called the Midnight Frolics. It's an amateur singing contest or whatever, and he sings on the show and gets noticed and invited to join a group that were called I think it was called the Rocky Mountain Balladeers or whatever at the time. Now, you may, I know one of you at least has recognized, who knows who Leonard Sly eventually became? Okay, Roy Rogers. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, he was my hero too. And so Roy Rogers comes out like a lot of people did from the Midwest, and he's just working. He's driving trucks and picking fruit and doing whatever. And so the California dream starts to unfold for him. Now he puts an ad in the Herald Examiner for a yodeler